Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for being here for this session. We will be talking about urban mobility and the link between, or the balance in urban mobility. We will be talking with the people here with me. These are the conference speakers. I'll introduce them very quickly. First of all, we have Jonathan Sebbane, who's Director General of SOGARIS. On my left, SOGARIS, sorry. I didn't pronounce that well enough. Bruno Hervé, Vice President, Executive Director of Smart and Resourceful Cities for SUEZ. We'll be asking this gentleman questions. And then we have Jean-Louis Houpert, who's Head of Property Valuing, Purchasing and Logistics for RATP, the railway services, and we'll be asking this gentleman, questions about urban mobility. So we'll be talking about the challenge that mobility sets in today's world and the future's world, with the whole strengthening and increasing of people and merchandise being ferried around, with all of the challenges involved with climate change and integration of all of this within urban mobility. And then what solutions will be available for, we'll ask the players here what their idea about technical, environmental and climate-related solutions are available, and what do they suggest in order to meet these urban mobility challenges of the future. Now, before we move on to the questions, you can ask questions yourselves. I'll try to answer 2 or 3 of them if we have time at the end of the session. You can go onto Slido. You can go directly onto Slido. You have the information about it right at the top of the screen. You have the code that you need to enter in order to access the platform and ask questions, and I'll try to answer as many questions as possible, as I just said. Now, in order to not get you to waste time, let's start with a few questions. And I'd like to ask Bruno these questions. First of all, let's ask about smart cities, connected cities, digital cities. These are the words that we often hear. They're more and more frequently talked about in design, management and operating of cities, networks, infrastructures within cities. So could you please tell us examples, or give us examples, about the way in which SUEZ deal with this idea of smart cities, and how do they develop it and develop historic or legacy activities? Could you give us maybe a few concrete examples that you have seen in the company? Of course, with great pleasure, and hello to everyone. Now, what comes to mind? A very real example. We've been working on this for 1.5 years. You may have heard of this. Smart City, the Smart City of Dijon. And what's original in this project, or different, is that it was thought of in a cross-functional way to remove any silos within the departments of the city-town departments. So we're grouping in terms of hypervision and supervision within a central command area a certain number of vertical activities, so public lighting, monitoring, traffic circulation regulation, and the end purpose, once you've connected all of this equipment, is to get to work better together, all of these different elements, and ensure some form of cross-functionality. So we think and we plan these over the long term. So there's this idea of sober, frugal and efficient city, but we also do this in real time, and that's where we start moving into issues to do with mobility. So for example, how do we better organize services faced with incidents on in the street, a fire, car accident, a lorry that's tipped over, or maybe even a sporting event happening? So how do we free up, optimize, rethink in a better way all of the different elements linked to all of this? These are the issues that we have to deal with in smart cities. And to answer your question, that's what I would say. I have other examples that come to mind. For example, what we call smart trucks, so changing equipment to make it more mobile. So, for example, a recuperation lorry, or sort of a skip lorry, they're in the street, and you have this lorry driving around the streets. So we have a fleet of 10,000 vehicles, actually, in SUEZ that provide this type of service on a daily basis. It's really the core aspect of mobility. And one of the questions we asked ourselves was, well, we have this lorry, and what do we do in order to ensure that it provides new services to people? And the idea is that by turning this equipment into a mobile equipment, piece of equipment that captures data, and that's where smart comes into play, well, there's all sorts of things that could then be super useful to cities and public powers and authorities, and generally to citizens. I'm thinking, for example, of identifying energy losses by measuring surface temperatures, and also problems with insulation or leaks, topography of facades, measuring the sound levels. That's a big discussion in cities. There are certain areas where the rents are too high for some reason. You have a certain number of objects that move around, that are mobile, that could capture this data. And then, of course, we could also monitor quality of air, pollution levels, pollen levels, and that's developing also thanks to smell sensors or smell-based sensors. So something that could be construed to be a smell nuisance, or the state of the roads also. When you go every day along the same route, then you're able quite gladly, to measure the impact on the road. So you can measure this, and through mobility solutions that were not necessarily thought of as such right at the beginning, you can provide they're mobile solutions. You provide a certain number of additional new services, and this thanks to the advent of digital technology and intelligent processing. You can give this, provide this, it's via collected data. Thank you for these first elements. So we're talking about using digital tools available and technologies available today to really link them to these legacy activities that you carry out, to provide data and then maybe be at the right place at the right time with fine-tuned knowledge of this data. Now, you're talking about the air quality of air. I think there are solutions, aren't there, that developed by your company for local communities, for network operators. Do you have a few examples to give us about this? Okay, of course. Now, just to talk about the situation, we're faced with one of the major essential elements in terms of living in town and thinking about new urban planning. The WHO says 91% of people live in an environment where the quality of air is critical or bad. It represents 7 million premature deaths per year. 800,000 of those are in Europe. And so the challenge, of course, is essential. There are two elements. I was referring to monitoring and surveillance earlier on. I'm not coming back on what I said earlier on about sensors. There are all sorts of different sensors. We can have these mobile sensors. And then there's the idea of then we need to process the data on air quality. We have developed certain solutions that are either static solutions or mobile ones. We concentrate on solutions actually that are static. Those are the innovations that we developed around these carbon wells, what are called so-called carbon wells. Some of them are settled in, and we use photosynthesis with microalgae systems. We've actually captured and kept CO2 and filtered some of the elements that were linked to air pollution. So, for example, fine particulates, and this system was deployed in Paris. And in fact, there are some Place d'Alésia. You may have seen these. We've also developed a certain number of these, or set them up in more confined areas, and this leads to solutions that are even more efficient when you're in a confined area, because the pollution issues have far higher and stronger impact. So with the RATP services, in a metro station in Paris, we have developed, I think Jean-Louis knows this topic very well by the look of him. So in a Paris metro station, we've developed this and set it up in order to be able to filter and capture and remove all of the fine particulates that are suspended in the air that are noxious for quality of air. And last week we inaugurated a solution that's about the size of a bus shelter in a school to create a bubble of pure air, fresh air, clean air in a certain surface area around. There are pilot projects that are happening, around this topic. Over the past 15 years, we've been making massive efforts on research and development in terms of air quality. We have over 500 projects ongoing on this topic at the moment. So I'm just sharing some of the pilot projects with you, or the information about it. But of course, an essential topic is this one, and we're putting a great deal of our energy into resolving these issues. We can't be a player in the environment if we're not positioned in this area. And of course, it's our role as service providers to serve public powers to think and innovate and provide solutions around this. Thank you. Great. Thank you for these wonderful examples. So one could imagine these air sort of bubbles positioned around it in schools, you said, or metro stations. Each urban piece of equipment could have this type of system be installed. And so all of these systems altogether could help clean up, if I may say so, the city air. Absolutely. So you need to anticipate the problem, you need to work at reducing it, and where we cannot avoid these problems occurring, I'm thinking about confined spaces, I was referring to them earlier on, then you need to do everything you can to process the air, filter it. And the good news is that there are solutions. And within the partnership that we're deploying and testing, Jean-Louis, I think that we can confirm to the audience that the results of the pilot projects are showing that things are working, and they're very encouraging. So then we have the question of deploying it at a wider scale, on a wider scale. So we can capture these fine particulates, but maybe one day we'll be able to capture viruses that might be floating around in the air. Not necessarily a question, it's more like just a thought off the top of my head. So it could be difficult. But during this difficult time, it could be something that would be useful. Now, thank you for these first elements. Maybe we'll have a second phase with exchange of information and looking at your different opinions. Now, we talked about the RATP. Jean-Louis, I have a few questions for you also, and maybe a few thoughts on what we can do together to develop urban mobility. So the challenges and the solutions we could. Now, what's in the news? It's strong news. The health crisis has had major effects on mobility for people living in the Paris region over the past few months. This has really been at the heart of the subject. So I have a question that's quite a wide-spanning question to introduce this subject and the challenges. Could you tell us how you think this crisis has redefined or even defined the idea that underpins mobility, urban mobility, and has it strengthened challenges that were already there? Has it created new ones or brought new ones? So could you give us a few elements about this, please? Very good. If I'd taken the floor as was initially planned in March, I think the MIPIM that happens would have been in March, normally. I would have said that mobility was a sector that was fully expanding at the moment, with a number of trips forecast to move from 243 billion to 300 billion in the world, so an increase by 23% between now and 2030. But when I talk to you on 15th, because I'm talking on the 15th of September, in this world that is dealing with COVID, well, we have a new subject that's come into the picture. In all major cities all over the world, there's been a drop in the frequency or the use of public transport. Just to give you an idea, during the crisis, at the strongest moment, Madrid lost almost 95% of its use, New York 90%, Singapore 70%, in Paris on the RATP network in July. We were back at 45%, and when I'm talking 65% of the traffic is picked up on the buses and the metros and the RERs, but this is something that is very slow to go back to what it was before. And in a few days, we went from transport being the safest and the most inclusive to a system of transport that people are turning away from because people are preferring to use their bicycle. As long as the weather is good, then it's fine. So people are also using their cars. All you have to do is go out onto the streets and you'll see in the avenues and big streets. If the situation carries on the way it's going, then it could be an environmental disaster. So we really, really need to reconquer travelers, reassure them about the fact that the public transport system is safe and environmentally sound. Is a challenge that was not really something we'd put into, we'd really thought about or included in our assessments. And so urban mobility is going to play an essential role in mobility as a whole. I don't know if COVID is going to totally change the dynamic of urban dwelling and people moving. The 600 biggest cities in the world bring together, or will bring together, over 60% of the GDP between now and 2050. 2.5 billion urban dwellers more between now and 2050. So the rarity of urban spaces, the polarized nature of cities, climate change, all of these challenges that we all know are going to be really at the heart of our daily lives and challenges. So I think urban transport still has a few good years ahead of it. But we're at a moment in time where we need to reassure people. RATP as a group is, of course, there to play its important role, or an important role, by being a partner in cities. What does it mean, being a partner in cities? It means responding and providing responses to the needs and demands of cities, and it means accompanying the transformation of the city. So responding to demand for citizens now is reassuring them that when they take public transport, they're not putting themselves in danger from a health point of view. So they have to wear the mask, increase twofold pretty much of the cleaning operations in all of our transport systems. We need to reassure them that they'll be living in a clean city. So our contribution is something that can be seen, will be seen through the changes in the bus fleet that between now and 2025 will be fully clean. 4,770 buses that will be gas-run, powered, or hybrid, or electric, with all of the changes that implies in the bus centres, the bus warehouse, and a lot to do with air quality. Over the past 4 years, we've invested almost 70 million euros on performing the air extraction systems, or on changing the air extraction from the depots, and we've worked on this with SUEZ. We're going to generalize electric braking rather than mechanical braking to limit the emission of fine particulates. A lot of movement is in play, and work in order to respond to the requirements in the city. So this is something. The RATP has an impressive footprint in the city, an underground footprint that's impressive, but also an overground footprint that's impressive. Over 100 industrial centres, 2,000 kilometres of fibre networks, 500,000 square metres of tertiary sector. We're the biggest mall or commercial centre in the Paris region, with our shops and in the stations. We have many assets to help the transformation of the city. And just to give you a few examples, we're not just sticking to modernizing our industrial apparatus or system. Over the past few years, we're trying to deploy a strategy to have, to include the urban aspect, to redesign mobility in cities. It means that we'll be able to transform a working city, the maintenance of the metro line, the best depot, electrifying it, centralizing it. We're in charge of dealing with our industry, and while we're doing this, we're making the most of it to create or free up space, building space in the city, and building above or next to these industrial centers. We're trying to build quarters, neighborhoods, housing, public equipment, offices, all of the different ranges of offices, from social housing with our social donor company, and a property management company. And so this functional and social mix and this effort to sustain cities through these very much plant or projects that encourage the use of plants and the planting of plants, we have a program called 4,000 houses for by 2032. That's the name of the project. It's a strategic program within the company that consists in, as things go along, that have an impact, an imprint, a footprint in the urban landscape. Well, we're doing this, so we're going to be able to be building 4,000 houses or homes, and some of them will be environmental ones, and this will enable RATP workers to house themselves in town so that they can come and go to work at the early hours of the morning or wherever they were required to come. Thank you very much, Jean-Louis, for these very enriching examples. So RATP is historically a mobility player, and today they are a true player in the transformation and changes operating in cities, and also the management with various subjects from the quality of air all the way down to property. So anyway, that's perfect, and thank you once again for this information. That's very, very interesting. And now we talked about mobility of people. I think that the subject of logistics and goods transport is, of course, very interesting, and I will not talk about urban mobility without talking about this. Now, as an introduction, before questions to Jonathan, I would just like to make the most of the time to mention something, and it's linked very much to the event today. SOGARIS was the winner of the MIPIM Awards in the category Best Industrial and Logistics and Environment for their Chapelle International project, logistics project. And if you wish, we can talk about this. So it's a 2020 award, and it's there to recompense the excellence of this multimodal logistics system that's situated, and this is one of the major challenges that you've been able to resolve. It's situated in the heart of Paris, in the 18th arrondissement, the 18th quarter neighborhood. Now, to come back to this idea of urban mobility, it's a much wider concept. Could you please give us an introduction of the company, just as an introduction, and then explain to us in what way the equipment developed by your unit are in fact part of the solutions, and this to meet the challenge of urban mobility. Okay, I'll try to answer. Thank you for your question. Hello to everyone. As an introduction, I'd just like to say that mobility in cities is a complicated set of elements, and there are variable elements. So one of them is that it concerns men and women. It doesn't represent diversity, and I apologize for this, but I'm saying this with a great deal of open-mindedness. Now, SOGARIS, this is a property company specializing in urban logistics, especially for Greater Paris area. And it's also a history that's been around for a long time. It was historically a company that was dedicated to logistics operations, structural. The flow of merchandise came from the south and went up towards Paris. Now, the story did not work as well as it ought to have. This company pretty much went bankrupt, and then it turned more and more towards logistics and buildings with the intelligent building, and I'm paying homage to those who bought or developed these projects. So leading to the development of a Greater Paris area that runs over hundreds of thousands of square meters. And as I said, they prioritize urban logistics. We'll talk about what that means today, but there are two main exceptions, I would say. So in an institutional for institutionalists, this is defined by the type of operation. So urban logistics defines a whole series of activities that aim at taking people and goods towards the center of town. So when you have a big depot for e-trade, even if it's far from cities, that's part of urban logistics. And that's the national definition. Now, we may be more restrictive in this because the siting or the localization of this, or the location of this is very much linked to our environment. So today we're concentrating on property developments that are in the dense areas. For Greater Paris, we're talking between Notre-Dame and the A86, which is the outer ring road. There's a great diversity of scale and type of assets that is actually very important. And SOGARIS today is developing a network of sites with major platforms, such as one might have in Rungis or Créteil, in these major depots that you might come across in the Greater Paris. And then on a more urban scale, we develop major buildings such as Chapelle Internationale, and we're talking about programs that are going to be going beyond the 30 or 40,000 square meters. And then another project that's ongoing in Val-de-Marne, in Vitry-sur-Seine, is one of them. And then on a finer scale, we can develop spaces linked to proximity. Now, this is what Jean-Louis Houpert was saying, the mixity of different systems, being able to integrate the services of the city, and also, we need to be able to develop this type of activity, and we'll come back to this. Will need this for economic reasons. They require logistics that are very much linked to e-trade, and also for environmental challenges, local policy ones, local communities and public authority players. They are really we're talking about the most polluting flows. So this is a priority. So this is what SOGARIS is doing at the moment. This is just an example. You asked me to talk about it when I was preparing for this conference. SOGARIS today is working on the development of a certain number of projects, and the one that will be coming out soon in November really demonstrates what I just talked. It's a 1,000 square meter site. It's not very big, but it's actually under the Boulevard Périphérique. So the challenge is urban quality insertion. We reinvest in an infrastructure, which is not that easy. But we do this with the capacity to really maximize the economic input, because, of course, you could bring loads in that are as light as possible, but the distribution is done in passenger cars. And that's one of the obligations that SOGARIS imposes on its operators, that it should be done in private cars. So we minimize the number of channels that come and circulate in these very heavily urbanized areas, the north of Paris and the southern part below the ring road. So thank you very much for this presentation of the examples. And what's interesting is the example of the use and reuse of the surface area of the périphérique. I think that we're really there. You're becoming a player, and you're reappropriating and requalifying that what we're used to calling areas that are left aside in cities, and the players in urban logistics are taking these areas back in hand and meeting this challenge and integrating these areas into wider projects. And when we were preparing for this meeting, we decided that each warehouse or depot in itself was an urban project in itself, and that it would bring together a great deal of competences and skills. And then just to add to this, what we notice is that there's more and more requirement to integrate things in the designing of these different depots. So is this not a way of complexifying things? Does it not mean that there are more requirements, local requirements, urban requirements, environmental and architectural requirements? How do you actually manage this type of information that may be coming from different directions?
Well, I don't know, but at least we're trying. In order to understand how we manage this complexity, well, in fact, it's something which has to be done between the owner and we need to put things into perspectives, because today we have the development of the so-called urban logistics, and we are in a very special moment, and the speakers before me detail this. But logistics is a very special sector of activities, because of course, it's undergoing the economic shock that everyone knows, and we know how severe and uncertain it is. But it's a counter-cyclical sector also. We saw this with the lockdown, development of e-commerce, home deliveries, which in a way came well, its development had to speed up following a trend that we had seen for quite a while. And logistics today is of course, led by the transformation of the way people consume, and people consume differently, and therefore logistics is impacted. And this is a major change which is very structuring for our modern economy, but also for urban economies. And today, a market is being built with a very strong demand for logistics space, and therefore we will be able to overcome this difficulty. And there's a very constrained offer, because real estate is a very big constraint, and there's the nature of this expertise, of this know-how, where we have both logistics and urban development. And this is something which is being developed nowadays, but it's in its very early days. And so we're going to have to create partnerships, as we did with RATP, and which should enable us to develop, our skills to think together. And but we are really today at the tipping point when we see the figures. I mean, in Paris there are 200,000 deliveries a day. New York, 1 million deliveries a day. There was this study produced during lockdown where London is ahead of us in terms of e-commerce, but with this lockdown, I think they won 3 to 4 years in terms of development. And a house being built in London, you need at least 7 to 8 square meters more. I'm not saying it's right or not. I'm just saying these are facts, and we are in a context of huge transformation of our lifestyles, and this generates positive aspects, whether it's making things more available, products more available for those who are interested in it. But there are a number of things that must be circumvented, and this is what we do. And we work we've been working on developing solutions adapted to professionals, but also adapted to the requirements of living in cities. This means working on decarbonation and reducing the environmental footprint of people and goods. Well, thank you very much for this information and these figures, these ratios, which I'm not trying to know whether it's good or not, but at least it proves very clearly the trend, this huge trend. Well, I think we all have convictions. I'm not here, of course, to mention them, but there are facts, and we must take facts as they are. Yes, but it's very interesting to see this huge trend in logistics. But thank you very much, the three of you, for this first round of sharing information and concrete examples. Maybe you'd like to comment, to react. Maybe we could. You would like to comment on what the other speaker said. Well, maybe a few words, because I'm part of a very traditional company, which has, a reputation of being siloed. And when I listen to Jonathan, we are entering this world of hybridization of practices, opening to partnerships, and when everyone looks at their own playground, and then when you look at what's beneath the lid, you see this potential. I like to mention these bus centers. We have 25 bus centers in Paris and Ile-de-France, 10 in Paris, and the bus center is full at night because buses, aren't used, but it's empty during the day. 2 hectares by 10. So during the day you have about 20 hectares that are free during the day. So it's time to find a mixed use, and how can we valorize these square meters that are free during the daytime. In the 18th district there's a bus center called Béliard. It's a parking, open parking, concrete, watertight, which is going to be totally transformed. We're going to have 2,000 square meters for a garden. We're going to rationalize this bus center and cover it with a roof to generate 25,000 of square meters of housing and shops and everything. I think we are leaving this world of silos, and we are moving towards hybridization. Well, yes, it's extremely interesting what you just said, and as I talked put to you, maybe one of the elements, amongst so many others that you mentioned, maybe what we need to take away from, as well as how we're going to solve all these challenges, is maybe the question of partnerships, cooperation. We saw this with SUEZ, we saw this with the RATP, we saw it with SOGARIS. In fact, this is probably how we will be finding the right people to fight right jobs, the right skills to make this puzzle, because there's not just one solution, it's not one know-how, it's not one activity. There are so many activities, so many know-how, so many skills, and with these examples you just gave, I believe one of the solutions comes from, these partnerships and bringing people together. Yes, please go ahead. Yes. Oh, yes, to comment. I believe that building cities today is extremely complex. It's more and more complex because of technical issues, financial issues also, because today to have the capacity to develop real estate in town is also the capacity to raise funds, access funding, and by all means, cooperation is essential, and it's probably something which is clear from what came out of the Grand Paris and these various trends and tenders and competitions we had. And there's, of course, there's promoting, there's developing, and they had to get together. But it was very relevant for them to partner up with other entities such as SUEZ, RATP, and others. I believe if we can capitalize on what I believe is what we learned from this sequence, we will be able to take this one step further. And what we need to bear in mind is that transformation processes are extremely fast, unclear, but extremely fast, and therefore we're always fighting against time with dynamics that are sometimes out of our reach, and therefore it's all the more important to be able to work together. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing these thoughts with us. And of course, if you have any questions, I don't see any questions on my screen, so if I have any, but when I have questions from the floor or the audience, of course, I will take them. Jonathan, you mentioned the Greater Paris, le Grand Paris. I believe there's another challenge, and they've got many challenges, but this one is probably an interesting one for our discussion right now. Maybe discussing scale, work scale. There's the urban project, there's mobility, there's this Greater Paris metropolis, and this new scale that we are starting to apprehend, and we have been over the last few years, which will be working scale for the years to come. Now, this change, I'd say this geographical change, because we are talking about surfaces, we are talking about more counties, villages, or connections between cities or villages, and this is an open question, by the way, but will it impact your activities, and can you see the impact today, or will it be impacting you more in the future than today? Anything to share? Well, as far as we're concerned, it's clear. I don't want to repeat what Jean-Louis and Jonathan just said, but we've moved from an infrastructure economy to a functionality economy. We are representing three companies who were big infrastructures with big projects, with a great know-how in terms of capacity to design and integrate and operate these infrastructures over a long time, as good as possible, improving over time. But now we need to change our capacity to think projects, and we need to have the user at the heart of everything, and then try and manage major projects around the user and what people want to do. Now, how can we operate this change? How can we change our processes? We need to support our teams. We need to assist them in this change, in this, and we've certainly seen it happen so far. Take energy, environment, mobility. At one moment, these are issues that interact. They are intertwined, and I wouldn't go so far to say it's one single activity, but this is probably not the question. What's interesting here is to have this holistic vision of any action that we would like to start, being very careful, and Jonathan reminded us of this. You know, what he imposes in his project is truly to think about so-called negative internalities that had not been perceived as such, be it only 5 years ago. And this led to new working methods, and therefore this is a really exciting period that we are living. Yes, to add to what Bruno just said, it seems to me that today one of the structuring aspects of urban mobility is this phenomenon of metropolization, and therefore our know-how is extremely useful for what we do, but also for the debate. And this metropolization, and this is not me saying, it's somebody like Daniel Béard put it very clearly. There's the network. We work as a network. We must be able to work as a network. For SOGARIS, for real estate, working in a network is essential. And this is something which provides added value at different levels. So we have this capacity to develop real estate as such, and these are very local challenges with issues of urban insertion that are very precise. But then we must be able to think about rolling out different networks where we will be facing important commerciality for the professionals of logistics and distribution. There's a very strong demand, I said this, but we must be able to meet expectations such as reducing our ecological footprint, and this is very important for sites, but also for the Greater Paris as a whole. And therefore, we really must find an answer to your question. We must find a capacity to work at different levels and provide a solution to complex problems who, by nature, we're facing. Well, thank you very much. This was a perfect conclusion with all the key words of this session, which is coming to an end. And therefore, I would like to thank our three speakers for being with us today, for sharing their time and experience with us. Very concrete examples and a very exciting vision about urban mobility. And these are the challenges for tomorrow, but in fact we are already facing them today. Thank you very much to one and all. Thank you very much for attending this session, and I think we now have a little coffee break before the next session. Thank you very much.